enough, I don't know how because I've had it in for 2 seasons now, but it always works. I put it out in the sun afterwards and I dry it out and, somehow the sound still managed to come out of it. But funnily enough and related to that, my daughter, she teaches violin to like, ranging in age between I think 3 years old and probably 12 years old. And she was explaining um, something to I think it was a 5-year old yesterday about she was saying, oh, and then you've got to turn clockwise. And she said the child looked at her very puzzled. And then she's like, clockwise, like, you know what clockwise is, right? And then she looked at the mother, and the mother was like, I don't know if they do know what clockwise is because a lot of children don't have clocks in their houses. But related to that, she was also talking about, how you listen on the radio. And again, another child just looked at her like, what's a radio?
Kim had sent me an audio of birdsong, and she asked me for the birds, and I mentioned that one of them was a Carolina wren. And I described the Carolina wren's voice as this two general voices. One is tea kettle, tea kettle, tea kettle, tea kettle. The other voice I described as an old rotary phone dialing 10. And I bet you there's a quarter of the world has never, at least a quarter, has quarter of the world, not including the outside, a quarter of the eastern of North America has probably never used, if not more than that, a rotary phone. And the sound a rotary phone at 10 makes is. So that's how this bird sounds like. It sounds like a rotary phone.
Right. It used to. That's so true. It used to take 5 minutes to. It wasn't. I guess it was dial a number. It actually was dial a number, right? And then the push buttons came in, and now we don't even push any buttons. We just, I guess touch a name or an icon.
With rotary phones, the number of clicks determined how long it would take to dial that number. So New York City was given 212. No phone number was allowed to start with 1 because 1 was the prefix that told you it was a foreign code. So New York, 212 was one of the shortest possible rotary phone numbers. The shortest was Washington, D.C., 211.
Would that be based on Morse code, or is that completely different?
No, it's just the number of dots that it's just counting how many ticks it hears. Back then, it was easy to create an audio counter that would identify the number of ticks and would then allow the individual signal to manually switch from one electrical set of wires to another set of wires. Before that, you had the old switchboard operators where you had mostly women sitting by gigantic desks with patch cords, and a phone would call up, and they would then take. They would listen to the what number you want, and you would tell them what number you wanted. They would pull it out of their patch cord terminal, and then they would put it into the patch cord terminal of the customer who you wanted to talk to. So that was manual switching of telephone signals. You would have gigantic phone banks with hundreds of patch cords, of essentially something similar to the old microphone cord. The was like a 7mm microphone cord,
right? And
so that's how they did it.
They had these huge buildings, right, where women were working inside of them doing all these patchworks for the telephones, right? Do you know what year did they get rid of that? Was it like the 1970s? Like approximately?
It would have been earlier than that.
Okay.
Because I think we had the ability to do switching in the 50s. But it also wait a second. If you were in a rural community where they just didn't want to spend the money on putting in the expensive switching equipment. It was still cheaper to pay somebody $3 an hour to do the work. So yeah, that could have gotten into the 60s in some communities, if that was cost benefit for the phone companies. And I'm sure other countries still use that probably into the 70s, simply because it was expensive to get modernized switching equipment. Should we start? Should we start the solar system? Okay, when I was I we have a steering committee on this group. It's four people, but it's mostly really just Kim and I. The other two do help out, but they're because their schedules are much more complicated. And I'm always telling them, they give me feedback, I give them feedback. And I a couple of days ago, it's like 4 in the morning. I said, "All right, I woke up 12 o'clock this morning. I couldn't sleep, so for an hour, I sketched out what I was going to say for today." And I described how I was, this is not going to be, uh, this is going to start literally from the beginning of the solar system. Today's discussion of spring will begin at the dawn of the solar system, at the beginning of Earth, at the beginning of the sun. So I might as well start. Make it easier for people who are going to be catching this later on, uh, listening to it remotely instead of listening to it live. So let the they don't have to hear us tidbits for a half an hour until we build an audience. About 5 billion years ago, I don't know the exact date. I wasn't about 5 billion years ago. Another star, a second generation star, exploded, gave up its life, sent out quadrillions of tons of hydrogen, helium, and heavier elements. And the process of the explosion itself also created heavier elements. And that just drifted in space for God knows how many tens of millions of years. Eventually, gravity started to win. And parts of that gigantic stellar nebula started to coalesce and started to condense. Lighter elements would be drawn toward the center because they're lighter, they have less momentum. Heavier elements, you get weirdness with rocks and stones and heavier pieces. Because while, yes, they obviously have a larger mass, they also are more likely to interfere with themselves. And you can get a situation where really large rocks literally come at each other so quickly and miss each other and then get the resulting gravity boost is so great that they escape from the center of the area, but they're still in this nascent solar system, but they're no longer close enough to where the sun will eventually be to be part of the sun. They will become the planets. So over time, all of this conglomeration of matter, there will be a rotation imparted to it. It's just literally based on statistics that if you all of this mass has to come together eventually, it's going to develop spin. The spin it develops controls everything in the future of that solar system. Uh, the sun, the majority of the mass, in this case, it's like 99.5% of the mass of the solar system is the sun. The majority of that mass becomes the sun. Uh, some of the smaller rocks will become the inner planets. The larger rocks will have enough gravity that they can actually draw in hydrogen, helium, methane that escape to the sun's gravitational pull to become the gas giants. So we have, in the solar system, we have uh, Mercury, Venus, Earth, Mars as the rocks. We'll talk about the asteroid belt later. Then you have the four gas giants, and then you have the Pluto to be named later. Uh, let's call it a planet for the hell of it. Even though Pluto is weird,
For old time's sakes.
for all time's sakes, Pluto is, if we consider it a planet, it is the smallest planet. It is the smallest planet that has the largest by mass satellite. Uh, I think Pluto has five satellites in total. Uh, Pluto's main satellite, Chiron, or Chiron, is like 40% of the diameter of Pluto. It's huge in comparison. And they probably have almost exactly the same chemical composition. That they're probably just, it's even possible. We could go into that also with Earth, the Earth Moon system. How these they may have been once upon a time one body or two bodies, and they eventually got locked into orbit with each other. As this rotation, all of this angular momentum that I mentioned earlier, that is caused by just the mass of all of these lighter elements and heavier elements and larger rocks, they're all spinning in the same direction with each other. This is how you get planetary orbits. Planetary orbits are dependent upon how far away the planet is. It's not dependent upon the mass of the planet. It's dependent upon how far away they are. Uh, Obviously, the closer you are to the sun, the faster your orbit and the faster you're rotating in terms of kilometers per second. But they're all rotating. Oh, again, Pluto. It's always Pluto. It's always Pluto. They're all on the ecliptic plane. The ecliptic plane, for all practical purposes, is the sun's equator. And again, because the sun is 99.9, 99.5% something of all the mass of the entire solar system. That's because that's where the sun's center of mass is. That's, and we're not going to talk about barosphere. Bar Whatever. Barycenter. Barosphere is like completely different. We're not going to talk about the barycenter. We're going to just talk about the sun as the center of the solar system. Everything is rotating in the same direction. Planets, on the other hand, might not be rotating at the same speeds. Planets might be rotating slow. They might be rotating fast. It all depends on the momentum that they achieve as they coalesce and form. Typically, the larger planets, this is extraordinary. The larger planets have the higher rotational speeds. Jupiter has like an 8 hour day or 10 hour day. Saturn has like a 16-hour day. Jupiter is huge. Uh, so that's why the windstorms on Jupiter are absolutely phenomenal because it's just the Coriolis effects, the forces of that ball of gas spinning at that large a rate of speed. So all of the planets end up in an orbit uh, around the primary, the sun. And at the start, uh, if we could claim the start, the planets will all be spinning on the same axis of rotation as the axis of the um, the ecliptic plane. So all planets started with no axial tilt. Axial tilt is very important. I didn't publish that. Oh, I have two great charts in axial tilt. I'll have to get them in later on. So the Earth originally started with no axial tilt, just like most of the planets. The moon has a very, very small axial tilt. Mercury has a very, very small axial tilt. Venus is completely screwed. Something hit Venus early on. Same with Saturn. Venus and sorry, Saturn and Uranus. I don't remember Uranus. Uh, Never mind. So not that important. Uh, so most of the planets, all of the planets started with no axial tilt. Why does axial tilt matter? I mean, it's really, this is why we have seasons. The Earth is not spinning around. It's not perfectly aligned with the ecliptic plane and the sun. If it were perfectly aligned, then we would have a zero axial tilt or close enough to zero axial tilt. And you wouldn't even have a tropics, or you would have a very, very narrow band of tropics. You would just have the sun beating down 12 hours a day, dead on 0 degrees north and south, right on the equator. And you wouldn't have seasons because there wouldn't be that much of a difference between uh, what you would have seasons, and I can go into that later. I'm sorry, I take it back. You would have seasons, but they would be extremely irregular and they would be constantly changing because of eccentricity. So I'll completely ignore what I just said, and I might actually jump into that later on because it's fascinating. So something happened, and we think very, very early in the process, the Earth got whacked by a proto Mars sized object. And that part of that object after that gigantic collision remained inside the Earth. Part of it spun out into gigantic plume around orbiting around the Earth, and some of it is the basis of the moon. So we have this incredible situation where the Earth got hit really hard, and that is probably responsible for our axial tilt because unless it hit perfectly smack dead on the equator with no rotational bias left or right, it it would cause us to change our axis of spin just slightly. We don't know if it's always been what we think it is right now. It's right now it's between 22 degrees, a little less than 22, and 24.4 degrees, give or take a little. We don't know if it was smaller in the past, but the current axial tilt that we have is 24.44 degrees. Now, some of you who are old enough might have learned this in school and you were like, but I thought it was 23.5 degrees. It was 23.5 degrees. It's now 23.44 degrees. Actually, if you were in school 50 years ago, 40 years ago, it was 23.45 degrees, but they rounded it up to 23.5. Now it's 23.44, so we're rounding it down to 23.4. The axial tilt of the Earth changes. This is all because of the combination of all of the other objects in the solar system pulling and pushing gravitationally, tugging the Earth. This is what causes the Milankovitch cycles. This is what causes long-term climate change. The fact that we are in a solar system that has a lot of moving parts is why we have a very, very long-term changeable climate. I briefly mentioned the asteroid belt. We're still not 100% sure. There are two possibilities. One is something did form in the asteroid belt, and because of Jupiter and Mars and the Earth's cadences, eventually it got too close to Jupiter and it reached what's called the Roche limit, at which point the tidal forces were so great that it just pulled it into a bazillion pieces, or it just couldn't because of the same tidal forces form. And so that's why we have uh, several thousand varying in size from meters to 600 kilometers for Ceres, which is the largest of the. I believe Ceres was discovered like on the first day of the 19th century. I think it was like January 1st, 1801. So that's a lovely little bit of trivia. That's when they first set their telescopes and noticed, hey, that wasn't there yesterday. So I think Ceres is older. Is sorry, it's younger than Uranus. It's older. It's was discovered after Uranus. It was discovered before Neptune, and of course, discovered well before Pluto. So this was the era where we were starting to get enough high quality optics that and people who were good enough had, hey, that wasn't there yesterday. I had put it up at remembering what they were seeing and drawing pictures of the sky as they were, looking at it, that they could notice that things were moving. Um, Remember in the old days, there was a difference between the stars and the planets. The stars were considered fixed in the sky, and they're not, but we'll get back to that later. The planets moved. That's why none of the stars are Greek gods, but the planets are all Greek gods. But we named the planets after the Greek gods because they were in the sky so they were given positions of power. Yes, Ken.
Thank you. Oh, I mean, I'm enjoying your explanation of it, but I'm just thinking. So I have a question. We're at this spring equinox, and that's when the Earth's axis is tilted neither toward or away from the sun, right? So is that a
Equi,
degree? Pardon
equi,
me. Right?
equi
Or
means it's
equal to.
right on the equator.
So
It's
is that this? That doesn't change the degree tilt, though, right? That's
no.
just no. Okay.
What that means is that the Earth is in its part of the orbit where now the part facing the sun is the sun appears to be directly over the equator. I was going to introduce this later, but I might as well introduce this now. We have five basic lines, imaginary lines on the Earth. One of these days, we'll have to get enough money and actually paint these lines. We have the equator, we have the Tropic of Capricorn, we have the Tropic of Cancer, we have the Antarctic Circle, we have the Arctic Circle. These are imaginary lines, and the equator does change, but it changes exceedingly marginally. It changes so little that, for all practical purposes, it's really not worth mentioning. Here's where it gets funny. Uh, Antarctica has something like 90 odd percent of the Earth's fresh water. If and when it's going to happen, it just may not happen for thousands of years. It may not happen for millions of years. It may happen in 2300. If and when Antarctica melts, that is going to change the mass of the Earth slightly because all of that weight mass that is right now kept on the South Pole as ice will go into the oceans and will eventually. I'm sorry, I'm laughing at a joke I made yesterday, which has nothing to do with this. That will eventually. Is Oliver here? Oliver isn't here because Oliver would get the joke because it was to a post that he made. Uh, all of that mass that is right now at the absolute South Pole is going to eventually redistribute itself across the entire planet. And when it completely redistributes itself across the entire planet, that is going to make a slight change in the planet's center of gravity. And we will eventually swing to match that center of gravity. And so the equator is going to move north, north by a tiny amount. I don't know, could be by feet, meters. But eventually that equator will move. Okay, now for the joke I made yesterday. There was apparently there was an accident in Portugal, and there was this gigantic spill of wine, like I don't know, hundreds of thousands of barrels of wine. And I said it's got to be port wine because it's heading out to sea. So it's fine. It's going to the port and heading out to sea. It's port wine. All right, never mind. Uh, because of what I said earlier, that the Earth's axial tilt is changing, the tropics are changing. Now, the sun is moving. I really have to put that chart up because I think it is really vital that I show it. I did a couple of these yesterday, but I only really did one because the other ones really just gave up too much information, were too visually dirty. If you do too much information on a chart, you just can't. All right, so I just put up on the nest Earth's axial tilt from 1 million years ago to 1 million years from now. And I didn't put the averages, but it doesn't matter. The absolute maximum axial tilt for this time period is 24.453 degrees. The absolute minimum was 22.079 degrees. The cycle time from peak to peak varies between 34.7 thousand years and 46.9 thousand years, and it averages 41.1 thousand years. If you look at the chart, it's on. I put it under the C&E workshop account. You will notice that even though we call this cyclical, and we talk about it as being relatively regular, oh my God, it is not regular at all or cyclical at all. And I have a much longer version of this chart. It's just too large. This is only 1 million years. I could make this chart for 120 million years long instead of 2 million years long. But it would really not do it justice unless I would just spread that out on a sheet of paper like 40 feet long and 5 feet wide. To really see what's going on, you need a lot of what's we call it. You need a different aspect ratio. So this is just 2 million years of the chart, but it shows you that the Earth's axial tilt varies greatly. And why does this matter? Uh, we're going from 22 to 24 and a half. Let's just call it for argument's sake, a maximum of 24.5 degrees and a minimum of 22 degrees. I mentioned earlier the Arctic Circle and the Antarctic Circle. They are 90 degrees minus axial tilt. So if you have an axial tilt right now, it's 22.45 degrees, 44 degrees. Then the Arctic Circle is going to be 90 minus that, or it's going to be 66.56 degrees north, 66.56 degrees south. The Arctic Circle is the point where on the first day of Arctic, okay, on the first day of winter, the Arctic Circle will miss a day. There will be no sunrise on the first day of winter in at the Arctic Circle. And if you go higher up the Arctic in the Arctic, you have no sunrise the next day, the next day, the next day. You start to miss entire weeks, months even, where there is no sunrise. There is no sun. Uh, this has huge, obviously, effects on climate. Without the sun beating down on the ice, you could just keep on growing ice. So I'm in years, I'm looking at the chart right now at about 500 and well, let's call it 500,000 years from now. We're going to have for about 100,000 years an extremely narrow band where the axial tilt will never go between 23 and 20. It will only be 23 to 25, 23.5. So while that's actually because it's a narrow band, it's not that bad for winters, but it's also not that great for summers. So what it means is you're not going to grow a lot of ice on the other side of the world when they're in winter, but you're not going to melt a lot of ice on this side of the world during summer. This is all about paleoclimate. I don't know how to properly say this, although I'll find a way. I did not know much paleoclimate until about 7 or 8 years ago. I understood climate change in terms of atmospherics, but I didn't know natural climate change. So I completely immersed myself in natural climate change because I think if you're going to do this, if you want to learn about climate, you can't just learn about how we influence climate. You have to learn about how nature influences climate, which is why I think I'm relatively uh, expert in this topic, which is why I can discuss this with other people, which is why I'm doing it right now. It's important that we know where we came from so that we know where we're going. And just speaking as a member of Homo sapiens sapiens, We are in an amazing time period. The last 20,000 years, we went from a serious glaciation naturally to probably for the next like 50,000 years, even if, no matter what, if we screw it up or not, this would be like the mildest period in Earth's climate in the last hundred and something thousand years, like 122,000 years. So I don't think it's a coincidence that civilization, that Homo sapiens sapiens, formed in this time frame. I think we were blessed by this accident of extremely nice weather, especially in the European and North American regions. And yeah, okay, you're Asian. And this is why we are where we are today. Humanity exists because we're not still in the midst of this extraordinary ice age that made life extremely difficult. For a long time, then humanity. There were times about 80,000 years ago where they think you could have packed every single uh, member of the Homo sapiens, Cro-Magnon, Neanderthal in a football stadium, and you probably would have had room for quite a marching band. That was it. There really wasn't that many people alive. We were, struggling for survival. We were literally on the fringes because it's not just that the climate was cold. It's also that it reduced the amount of other things that were living. So the only way you could make a living was if you were on a coastline and you had abundant fish to eat, and maybe you were in an area that was near marsh and near savanna, so maybe you could find plants that were easily edible and sustainable. Otherwise, we may not have survived it. So it's we hit a period about 22,000 years ago. That was about the coldest that the Earth had seen for several hundred thousand years. Um, and there's other things involved here, and especially we had a long time ago, about 650,000 years ago, CO2 was down to about 170 parts per million, which is, 40% of what we have today. Plants still survive. I know people say, oh, if we go below 200, all life on Earth will extinguish. The plants were fine. They didn't have a problem with 170 ppm. They had a problem with the bloody cold. Low CO2 doesn't, kill plants as rapidly as frost kills plants. Yeah.
Hello. So
Yes,
how important is this axis or axial tilt to the seasons, to
it
having
is the
seasons on
seasons.
Earth? It is the seasons.
This is the seasons. Right now, the Earth is tilted but it's tilted. We are spinning. uh, the the procession of our rotation does not change. So we are always rotating the same, in the same angle. We are pointed 23.44 degrees away from the ecliptic plane. But there are times of the year where our orbit, like right now, has the sun directly over the equator. In about 3 months, the sun will be directly over the Tropic of Cancer. That's
Well, the
when
sun is
everybody.
headed it's headed north right now until
Yes,
the summer solstice, and then it starts to head south again, right?
yes.
Yeah, okay.
And when during the summer solstice means final destination. It's the same root word as station, stis. So train station is the stis, solar sun solstice, the end of the line. That's where as far as we go north. Uh, Robert just hello, Robert. I never say hello to people. I'm sorry because I've got to concentrate. Hello, Julian. Hello, Harold. I have to concentrate on what I'm doing. So I really
You're you're
I'm not a very good
unloading
host in this.
you're
But
unloading your encyclopedia.
So again, going back to what I was saying earlier, yes, the first day of summer is also the point where the sun is at its absolute highest on the in the sky in the northern hemisphere, which is the point where if you're above the Arctic Circle, remember the Arctic Circle had that period of absolutely no sun the first day of winter, and the further north you go, the less sun you had. So if you're 70 degrees, you might not see the sun for a couple of weeks. If you're 80 degrees, you might not see the sun for months. If you're 90 degrees, you won't see it for 6 months. But well, 5 months.
I
Sorry.
guess that's like parts of Norway, right? Is that where they have that seed bulb?
Yes.
Oh, it is. Okay. So they're not seeing the sun for weeks on end.
I don't think they get that far north, unless you talk about Spitsbergen. Spitsbergen might have 78 degrees. That might have, I'm going to actually pull that up. Oh my God, I'm working on
What about Sal? What about for Antarctica? Do they like the research stations down there? Do they have like
oh yeah,
weeks of
it's bloody
darkness?
horrible. Oh yeah, depends on where you go. McMurdo is Antarctica, but it's not deep Antarctica. So McMurdo still is it's like the mildest part of the darkness. Uh, all right, I just
Well,
put the
I was just gonna say, noticing around here, in Canada, once we hit that time change, it's like the neighbors all come out of their houses. And where I used to go for walks at 7 o'clock at night in the darkness, it's now light out till about 8 o'clock. And it's just, it's incredible what it does to your psyche, just having that much more light. And yeah, today, I mean, I think we're all going to feel, for those of us who lived in the North, much more alive and awake because it is a time of renewal just by the amount of light alone.
um yes, it really does make a difference. I just punched up the numbers for Spitsbergen, which is about 78 degrees north, and they have sunlight 240 something days of the year. So that means 120 something days
Oh,
of the year they don't have the sun at all, or the sun is barely above the horizon. So yeah, that's a two-thirds, one-third thing. So that's pretty
that would
desolate.
be difficult. That would be very difficult.
So
But
yeah,
they
so
also have they have quite high rates of alcoholism, I believe.
that
And that has something to do with it. We need the
people
light.
get bored.
Yeah,
Get
and it's
bored and
also, yeah, we need that vitamin D, I think, that natural vitamin D.
yeah, it really it's there is of course seasonally affective disorder, depression disorder. Because I don't think it's SAD. I think it's SADD. But yeah, the lack of sunlight will. Hey, I'm 40 north, 41 north here. So yeah, February can sometimes be a little depressing, even though February has more light. Uh, December, January can be a little depressing, but it's not that bad. It's really not that bad. You still get 9 hours a day. But yeah, I'm sure if you start to go into the 50s and the 60s, when it's like 6 hours a day, 5 hours a day, yeah, I'm sure that could really cramp your style and make you feel really terrible.
You could see
But
why the animals hibernate, right? It's like, I'm
oh,
going
that's
to
that's a
sleep.
different.
That's
Yeah, that's there's another
no,
reason
I
for that.
know, I
Yes.
know. But we kind of do go into a hibernation in the north here. I think it's just like, all right, not going outside for a few days or a few months.
So to recap, spring is caused by the Earth's natural rotation around the sun. Spring is the point in the year. Actually, I shouldn't say spring because there's 2 points of the year. The equinoxes are the point where the sun appears to be directly overhead on the equator. Then you have the autumnal. Sorry, you have the first day of summer, first day of winter. Gotta find the Latin name for those. I forgot the Latin name for those. where
Yeah,
the
we didn't
sun
mention vernal.
vernal
Vernal,
is this is today's vernal,
right.
the vernal equinox.
I just wanted to
Vernal.
say that in a sentence.
Oh, I say it all the time. In the next few months, I will be birding on a lot of vernal pools. Vernal pools are, well, you know what? I take it back because we ain't got no winter anymore. In the old days, you had vernal pools. That is areas where you had a lot of snow would fall, and the snow would be hidden away from the sunlight, so it wouldn't really melt very rapidly. And then all of a sudden, March comes, and it all melts at the same time, and then you have a vernal pool. You have low-lying areas in the middle of swamps or in the middle of even in fields, and you have these uh, they can last. Vernal ponds can be all year round if there's enough water and there's enough rain coming in. I'm thinking of one of my favorite places to bird. Has three vernal ponds, and there are times of the year where a real marsh where you cannot go through. It is underwater, and there's times of the year where the borders of the ponds there's almost no water at all. It's barely wet.
I have some of those here. Well, even though it was 18 degrees Celsius here yesterday, out my front window, I could still see some snow because that area really doesn't get that much sun during the day. So, besides the warm temperatures, you also need the sun hitting down on it. But on a trail that I go to, I didn't know that they were called vernal swamps, but I now thinking about it, there's a few along the way that will more than likely by, I would say June, maybe middle of May, they'll disappear. But they are there in the springtime.
Sorry, I'm taking my time to do something. I'm trying to find if that software. I have an algorithm calculation for given coordinates. I'll search for it another time because actually I think it's important enough piece of software. There's a Java code for it. It's an important enough piece of software that to share with people because it can actually help you do planning if you have the information of your own area, sunrise and sunset times for the year. I do it for for obvious reasons because I like to do these explainers and I like to figure out what's going on in the world. But the other reason is it's very useful. Oh yeah, Pup asked me a couple of months back, maybe a year ago. He asked me to do a workup for his area, sunlight coming in and going out for the whole year round. So I crafted a chart of an insolation chart for him using that software. So that's why the software it's a very useful piece of software if you plan on putting up solar panels and you want to know what to expect what time of year. Uh, Especially if you use the calculations for I might as well introduce that too. We are not just in an orbit that varies uh, the seasons. We are also in an orbit where the Earth is not always the same distance from the sun. Right now, we have an orbital eccentricity of 0.1666. Nice number, very easy to remember. What that means is roughly when the number is that low, it's almost exactly the same as the differential. So that means that the difference between the average distance from the sun and the shortest distance from the sun is 1.666%. Uh, Largest distance is 1.0166%, 101.666%. So that's it. It's very easy. As long as the number is like below three, then you have to start doing some calculations. So um, yeah, but this is where it gets to be a little bit more complicated because the amount of sunlight that comes in is not based on the distance to the sun. It's based on the square of the distance to the sun. This is the old R square rule that light varies not so much by the distance, but it varies by the square of the distance. So our um, our summers are cold in comparison to the southern hemisphere because our summer is when we are the farthest away from the sun. We are the farthest away from the sun in July 5th, and we are the closest to the sun in January 5th. And it does
You
change a little
know,
bit from year to year.
I think about that sometimes and I'm like, would our summers be a lot warmer if it was the opposite and our winters
Oh,
a lot
hell,
colder? That would be
7%,
horrible.
7% more sunlight. It doesn't mean 7% warmer, but it's 7%
Hmm.
more sunlight. And actually, I could do the calculations on how much that would be. But yeah, that would be like uh,
We would probably
almost
be hitting what
one and a
kind of
half percent,
1.5%
about 1.5%.
a temperature
One,
increase?
yeah, 1.5% of of 200 and of 288 degrees, 288 kelvins. So that's 4.5 degrees hotter. But it would also mean that we'd be 4.5 degrees colder in the winter. And that's yeah, I'll get back to that later. And that's at this very, very low eccentricity. If when we go to a higher eccentricity, which we don't have to worry about for like 70,000 years, when we get to higher eccentricity, then uh, you really see a major change. There's going to be a moment. I don't remember exactly when, like a little more than a million years ago, just a hair more. I'm sorry, from now, a little more than a million years from now, where the Earth's orbit will be the roundest it has been for 100 million years. And I'll get this information that's out there one of these days. I'll make sure that I look for it because I have to do the spreadsheet on it. But there's going to come a time where the Earth's orbit is so round there will be almost no difference between when we're the closest to the sun and the furthest to the sun. But that's only going to be for a few thousand years. On the other hand, if you lived in that period of time, if you live in that period of time, you like wouldn't even understand how it would be possible that later on there could be such dramatic differences. Right now, Australia is the opposite of us. So they are getting much colder winters and much hotter summers. And if you're in Central America, South America, you're also seeing that. And you, of course, Antarctica sees it worst of all. Worst of all. On the other hand, I take it back. Antarctica doesn't see it worst of all because it's there's no light in the wintertime anyway, so it doesn't matter. So Antarctica sees a brighter summer, but it wouldn't see a darker winter because there's no light. It just there's no light to be darker than. So with our North Pole, but now this is where it does matter. With our North Pole, of course, it doesn't matter the winter, but it matters in the summer. So right now, the North Pole is getting about as little sunlight as it has gotten in the last 22,000 years. So we should not be warming the planet. We should not be losing Greenland ice. We should not have glaciers melting. We should have the opposite right now because we are very near the nadir. We should be in a period of glaciation. Not enough for the Canada Shield to turn into ice again, not enough for the Wisconsin glaciers to return, but we should be in a colder environment, and we're not. Now we did see this until about 1850, 1860. We did see the northern hemisphere getting slightly colder very gradually, and then it completely reversed. In fact, the part of the world right now that is seeing the greatest amount of rate of change in heating is the Arctic. And that's because ratiometrically, the amount of uh, trapped IR in the atmosphere, the atmospheric heating, is a greater ratiometric change than the solar light level reaching the Arctic, which is why the Arctic is warming faster than any other part of the planet. The parts of the planet that are warming the least are, as I said earlier, South America and Australia. They're they're not warming as rapidly because their winters are extreme, even though their summers are spectacular. And then there's another part of the very important uh, concept in thermodynamics. It's called the fourth power law. Law. This derives from Stefan Boltzmann's law that the implied heat on an object is based on the insolation, the sunlight reaching that object to the 1/4 power, which is, by the way, this is a saving grace of thermodynamics. Again, this is one of those coincidences. Like, uh, if Earth had been a little closer, we wouldn't have liquid water. If Earth had been a little further, we would have almost perpetual ice. We like to think of the Goldilocks zone as being wide. No, it's really not that wide. The Goldilocks zone is actually relatively narrow. It's only a few million kilometers left and right. So we really lucked out. I mean, there would have been life on Earth, but it wouldn't be, Captain, it's not life as we know it. So it would
Well, Sal, isn't that's related to that the climate sensitivity, right? Like
yes,
that we only have, so many degrees going either way where life can survive on Earth.
yes.
And we're
And a lot
headed in the wrong direction.
uh
And
well, the good news, this is why I'm not one of those people who's running around with his hair on fire all the time, is that again, the amount of IR that is released by the Earth's surface and the atmosphere, but let's call it the Earth's surface, is based on the temperature to the fourth power, which means that if by some horrible circumstance Earth rises by 3 degrees Celsius, which is 1%, the amount of light, the amount of IR we will give off will go up by 4%. So a 1% increase in temperature creates a 4% increase in IR emissions. So the Earth will try to balance itself out. I mean, this is just basic thermodynamics. The problem is if you have more CO2 and you're absorbing more of that emitted light, you get into a feedback effect. It's not a linear feedback effect. It's an asymptotically negative feedback effect. But it's still, yeah, the Earth gets hotter, it absorbs more IR. The Earth gets hotter, it emits and then absorbs more IR. Then it goes on and on and on. Hotter emits more CO2 absorbs more. So you get into a positive feedback loop. It's a slow feedback loop because it is controlled by t to the fourth, but it nevertheless is still a feedback loop. It's an asymptotic feedback loop because we don't have uh, Venus's uh, Venus's atmosphere where it's 90 bar. It's 90 times the pressure of Earth's surface atmosphere, and it's almost all CO2, and no IR ever escapes. Um, Nobody tells you about this, but Venus's clouds are pretty much like a mirror. The amount of sunlight that reaches Venus's surface is a little bit more than half the sunlight that Earth's surface sees. And I know, but Venus is so much closer to the sun. Yeah, but its atmosphere is a mirror. So why is Venus 3 times the temperature of Earth? Venus is what happens when you run the greenhouse gas experiment to its extreme, because you have a huge pressure. You have and Venus does shit that no other planet does. I jokingly discussed it, but Venus's north and south poles are uh, um. I should have gotten into this earlier. I might as well get into it now. We talk about the dark side of the moon. Uh, matter of fact, it's all dark.
isn't that a song or
Yes, that's the final
I'm not going to
lyric.
sing it.
The final lyric is there is no dark side of the moon. As a matter of fact, it's all dark. The dark side of the moon is caused because the moon is tidally locked. It's not exactly a perfect tidal lock, but I forgot the name of it. But anyway, uh, the moon is rotating around the Earth at the same speed it is revolving around the Earth. And so we only get to see the same side of the moon all the time. Something similar to that is happening to Venus and Mercury, but not quite the same. The Earth moon has a one-to-one tidal lock. Or I should say the moon has a one-to-one tidal lock. Mercury is a I think a 2-to-1 tidal lock, and Venus is I forgot if it's a 2-to-1 tidal lock or a 3-to-1 tidal, a 2-to-1 tidal lock, or a 3-to-2 tidal lock. Sorry, this all gets crazy, but it's always tidal locks are always a whole number divided by a whole number. So it's not an irregular number or a rational number. It's going to be a rational number of an integer over an integer. In the moon's case, it's 1-to-1. What happens is you get resonance between because Venus is not completely homogeneous. There are parts of Venus that have a little higher density. There are parts of Mercury that are a little bit higher. I'm sure the Earth also has it, but it's not enough for Earth. And also, we're not that close. We're not close enough. And there's other things involved. And I will talk about that in 30 seconds. What will eventually happen is something at some time Venus will slow down enough that it will not be able to sustain the 2-to-1 tidal lock. Then Venus is going to go into an extremely irregular speed. It's going to speed up, slow down until eventually it hits 1-to-1, and then it will stabilize, and then it will always be at the same exact it's I mean, the length of day will be exactly the same as the length of year, which is going to really cause interesting things to happen in Venus because essentially only one side of Venus will see the sun. But Venus is this incredible greenhouse gas planet. It's not going to matter. Mercury, on the other hand, will be perfectly 1-to-1. So one half of Mercury will never see the sun. Another half of Mercury will be broiling in the sun. And if you're close enough to the Terminator is where, the sun don't shine, also known as Vancouver. If you're close enough that's a Canada joke. If you're close enough to the Terminator, you're going to have enough radiated heat from the hot side that you're not going to be, oh my God, freezing. And you would be able to have a permanent satellite, a permanent Earth, sorry, Earth, a manned presence on Mercury. This might not happen for millions of years, but if we're ever looking for a place to put to set life down on, it's not going to be the best life because oh my God, Mercury is I don't even know if you could build on Mercury because I guarantee you that the regolith is probably absolutely hard as stone, harder than anything we've ever dealt with. But yeah, you would be able to have a base there, and the temperature range wouldn't be that bad. So all you have to do is move a little bit closer to the sun, where you just get a little bit of sunlight, and you would be able to get unlimited solar energy. And so that would be a great place to set up shop. Getting back to Venus, which I love Venus. It just absolutely floors me. Venus is, I gotta do a calculation. Venus is about 470 degrees Celsius. It is 470 degrees Celsius in the winter. It is 470 degrees Celsius in the summer. It is 470 degrees Celsius on the North Pole, on the South Pole, on the equator. It is 470 degrees Celsius. Am I boring you here? In the daytime, in the nighttime. It's actually not. It's like 470 plus or minus 5 degrees. So it's 475 versus 465. Uh, this is greenhouse gas effect. It doesn't matter if you haven't seen the sun for 108 days. It doesn't matter if you're at the pole. It doesn't matter if you're at the 89 degrees north. Your temperature is almost exactly the same as your next door neighbor who is in sunlight in the summer in high noon. There's almost no difference. And this is why, this is the problem with greenhouse effect. The greenhouse effect can can really, generate extraordinary amounts of heat energy. In Venus's case, uh, okay. I said before that almost no light actually reaches the Venusian surface. So the Venusian surface gets only, I think, like 100 watts per meter square or 150 watts per meter square. I could get these numbers. But the surface emits 27 times more IR than the sun beams down upon it. So there's 27 times more heat energy in terms of watts per meter squared coming off of the surface of Venus than coming onto the surface of Venus. But much of that, a great deal of that, is held in by the atmosphere. But at the end of the day, which is a 216 Earth Day. At the end of the day, the amount of energy coming in is still the same amount of energy coming out. That is the problem with climate change. I knew we'd get to climate change eventually. Uh, in climate change, the amount of energy coming in is more than the energy going out. And that's why the Earth is heating up because we have added CO2 and nitric oxide and methane to the atmosphere at a much higher rate. So we are taking forever to stabilize. We will stabilize if we stay at a solid level, however high that solid level is, it will eventually stabilize. The problem is we're not stabilizing because we keep on adding more and adding more and adding more. So you have this endless baby bird with its mouth open, chirping for more food, more heat, until stabilization occurs. This is something that I had to deal with a couple of days ago. A couple of people asked me questions about what's going to happen if CO2 eventually, if humans stop emitting CO2 or emit a lower amount. And yeah, the ocean will eventually absorb it, but it's going to take time. And it's also going to be a situation where sometimes of the year it will absorb, sometimes of the year it will emit. So even though stabilization will occur, there are multiple camps about this. I am more in the man, house father, uh, road camp than I am in the Hansen camp. Hansen thinks it's going to take forever to stabilize. I'm more with the other guys. I think it's going to stabilize, but it'll be decades, not centuries, not millennia.
Right. Yeah, I mean, I'm in that camp with you, but I think also, another thing that's important is what materials do we have on Earth to absorb this radiation, this extra radiation that's coming in, right?
Well,
And to absorb the CO2, because we're losing the biomass of the trees and the plants and the soil and everything like that helps to regulate the climate.
well, Mother Nature does try. Mother Nature does like to combine H2O and CO2 in the presence of sunlight to turn that into sucrose. That is the photosynthesis equation. Plants plants like to take advantage of that sunlight and make more plant. So there is an absorptive there is a and that is free running and that will go forever. And there have been times in Earth's history where plants were able to just keep on going endlessly. That was the Carboniferous era. We talked about that, I don't know, about 5 or 6 weeks ago.
Right. But
Where
we Well, we also talk about, how the Amazon rainforest is becoming a carbon source rather than a carbon sink, right? Because it's being fragmented because of wildfires, because of land use change. And then also the boreal forest with the forest fires were becoming, at least for a certain amount of time, it was becoming a carbon source.
Yes.
Um, getting if I could just make this point right now, because we're talking about spring, wildflowers or spring wildflowers are also an important source for cycling key nutrients in the ecosystem. They're cycling the CO2 back into the soil, and they're also contributing to forest species diversity and providing nutrition to pollinators and animals. So um, I I wanted to talk a little bit about wildflowers. If that's if do you think that's a good time to do that? Because I
I,
found
I, I sure. I want 90 more seconds, and then I can
okay,
wrap up.
sure, of
Uh,
course.
because I left out. Oops, sorry. I just looked at the CO2 data. The CO2 data for the last few days was mellowing out. Yesterday it didn't mellow out. Okay, sorry. I'm always looking at data, people. I'm not one of these kids that is doing social media all the time or playing video games all the time. I'm looking at data all the time.
Oh,
I wanted to talk about
Sal, is this the Doom data? The Doom data
no that
set? That's or that
no this is no no. Doom's Watch comes out about midnight every day. It's ERA 5. I'll explain that. What I want the final thing I want to say about climate, and it's very very important, is the moon. The moon really is very important dealing with how Earth's seasons and how Earth has evolved climatologically over the last 4.5 billion years. It acts like a regulator on a clock. So the moon is reducing the Earth's instability. If there, like, because again, if you take a look at the axial tilt varies from 21.8 to 24.5. But a lot of that is because you've got the moon acting as a stabilizer. Yes, I know this is one of those things that religious people love to talk about, and it's just, this is the hand we were dealt. I don't believe in higher powers forcing this to happen. Uh, I just am amazed at how it happened. The moon reduces axial tilt, or it stabilizes axial tilt, and it stabilizes changes in axial tilt. So, for all practical purposes, the moon acts as a regulator for Earth's climate, and this is, to me, again, this is just a coincidence, but it's an amazing coincidence how life we could have stayed as amoeba for another 5 billion years, but we didn't. We advanced further and further and further because all of the things that could have knocked us down totally didn't knock us down totally. Yeah, a lot of bad stuff happened. The great oxidation event that pretty much killed almost everything on Earth. That converted everything on Earth from anaerobic to aerobic bacteria. I didn't convert. It's just that all the anaerobics died and the aerobics survived. And all of the other collision events that killed 30% or 50% of the species at one given time. Everything, somehow we got lucky and we got where we are today. But the moon helped, and the moon continues to help. And the moon has a 19-year cycle where it shifts between up and down by about 5 degrees. And this also has a natural climate effect. So there's a little bit of a 19-year signal. Not very, very much, but it also happens to be there, but it happens to be more affecting on tides. So it has more of a biological effect on climate than an astrological effect on climate. And I love talking about this stuff because it's just so amazing Well, it's out there. People want to learn about climate science. It's easy. It's actually not that hard to learn this stuff. But you have to be patient and you have to put in the time. Uh, but it's the same. I feel the same way about biology. I feel the same way about chemistry. This is an amazing universe we live in. It's so spectacular. You don't need to believe in religion. I think that's the whole idea of the early Jesuits when they wanted to learn about they wanted to learn about the natural world as to praise God, but I think it just took over that the wonder of the natural world itself. The knowledge is what really should drive us because it is so extraordinary. And I think I'm done with spring. Does anyone have any questions? We can always come back to this later on. And now we can switch from astronomic spring to biological spring. All right, Kim, it's yours.
Well, Sal, don't go anywhere. That, you did such a great job of that, and you really thoroughly described the physical relationship between the sun and the earth at the equinox, and much more than that, all the planets. I mean, one of the questions I have, and I don't know if you have an answer to this, because like you were talking about the different planets' axial tilts, and I'm just wondering like how different they are compared to the Earth, and whether or not they have seasons as well. So I
Yes,
don't
they
know if
do.
they do. Okay.
Mercury has, for all practical purposes, zero axial tilt. The moon has a 5-degree axial tilt, so it's really not very, very much. Uh, I think Venus and Uranus have a 90-degree axial tilt. They're spinning on their tops. So Venus and Venus and Uranus are, I think, sorry, is it Uranus that's not just spinning on its top, but it's also spinning in the opposite direction, or is it, I forgot. But one of them is actually spinning the wrong way. It got whacked so hard in the opposite direction that it is spinning in the opposite direction of all of the other planets in the solar system. So yeah, you axial tilt can vary greatly, and it depends on how many times you got whacked by how large objects you got whacked and where you got whacked. Uh, the
Well,
one other, the one other brief thing, sorry, because you mentioned it, is the ecliptic, or the angle of the eclipse, the ecliptic. Um, every planet is on the ecliptic, give or take like 1 degree, except for Pluto, and Pluto is like 17 degrees off alignment of the ecliptic plane. If you ever look at drawings of the orbits, you'll see that everything seems to be on the same page, on the same plane. And then you look at Pluto and it's slashed across. So that's another reason why they demoted it because it's it is so small and might not even have been originally a planet, might have just been a capture or an ejection. We could talk about that some other time.
well, I believe Uranus has been ejected. Um, this is observational data, scientific data. Please let me explain. I went on the Sagan Walk, the planetary walk in Ithaca, New York, and
That's where it
it
would be.
it is amazing. This walk where you start at the center of Ithaca downtown, and you start out at the sun, and then you walk through Ithaca, New York, and to go on a planetary walk. And when I went there, probably about 9 years ago, Uranus was nowhere to be found. We searched high and low for that, but there was construction in the city, and I think somehow it got taken down. But I highly recommend going there, and I'd actually like to go back there to see the rest of it because we couldn't find it. But Sal, in all your travels, you go on your hikes daily. What for you? Like you've talked about the physical coming of spring with the equinox, but what for you is the biggest or surest sign of phenomenological arrival of spring?
Uh, you'll note, those of us who, those of you who have followed my account for 5 years, 6 years, whatever long, that I always talk about the first skunk cabbage, also known as swamp cabbage of the year. And sometimes I get that as early January, and sometimes it's late February. But that is to me a sign of nature waking up. When the first skunk cabbage leaves pop up through the ice or snow and make their way up. That's the sign of spring.
Okay, that's a interesting sign. I have something actually about wildflowers that smell really bad. For me, I did put up in the nest there. It's the blooming or the sprouting of snowdrops that come out in my front garden, which is directly underneath an oak tree, which at this time of year doesn't have any leaves. It won't probably for like another month or a month and a half. Snowdrops, they are not a native wildflower of Ontario. I believe they were brought here by Europeans, but they seem to really like it here, and I think it actually is an important plant, for the insects. I did take a picture of it. I don't know if it's in the picture that I put there, but I just, decided to hang out
Yes.
underneath the oak tree, yesterday afternoon, and as I had mentioned to you in a tweet, I think I saw, or I did, I think it was a solitary bee, which I took a picture of, and there were a few ants around, and apparently ants are really good pollinators for these early spring flowers, and also the early spring flowers are really important food sources for the ants at this time of year because there isn't that much outside. So I wanted to ask people what's one of their signs of spring that they think once they see it, every year, that yeah, spring's here. We're making that transition from spring to winter.
Oh, we have Harold with a hand up.
Oh, hi Harold.
Hey, good afternoon, good morning, or good evening, depending on where you are on this spinning blob of stuff. Great conversation. Um, a lot of people ask me, Saul, what do I believe in? I believe in the universe, and nobody's going to change my mind at this point in life. But I thought you did a really excellent job of discussing the creation of our solar system and all of those little steps that led us to where we are right now. And I found it interesting when you were talking about the condensation of the planets and the spins and the orbit and the gas cloud and how things will naturally develop a spin. And I discovered this mathematically on my own, playing around with um, three body motion in a chaotic math engine. I think I was 22 or 23, and I was kind of playing with this thing, and it's like the Lorenz, the Lorenz set of mathematics that looks like a butterfly, by the way. Um, no relation to butterflies, but
The great attractor.
the great attractor, yes. And yeah, so that was really well done. And today I celebrate the vernal equinox. I celebrate the position of our Earth. Uh, but I've been trying to decolonize my mind from these labels. And I take greater inspiration that we're traveling at 2.2 million kilometers per hour towards the great attractor. speaking of great attractors, um, so I've tried to break my conscious perception from our solar centered perception. I don't know why I do these things, but it's fun for me. Um, and in New Brunswick right now, I was just in the backyard, and I take a walk every morning, and the woodpeckers are are going through their mate selection. And there's two male woodpeckers and one female. The female just wants to eat, and the two males just want to have sex. So we're going to watch that transpire. But where I am in New Brunswick, there's a
Oh,
wildflower. Oh,
species. Which species?
um, it's the red cap.
Red bellied.
Yeah, and the downies are out. I haven't seen the downies fooling around yet, but they will be. I know them. Always trying to have sex in spring, right? If we use that spring word. Um, yeah, so there's a wildflower in New Brunswick called bloodwort, and it's the first wildflower that appears, and it's a very short um, flower, very close to the ground. And this flower is the first flower that will bring the hummingbirds to the yard. And when I first got this property, we had very few hummingbirds, but I've built up the ecosystem, my garden with a lot of flowering um, plants and stuff, and now we have about almost 20 uh, hummingbirds in our yard during the summer, and they really love apples, which are not indigenous to Turtle Island, and they also like love black currant. They will
Hmm.
pollinate all my black currants, and
How
they do
about
that before the
mulberries?
no,
No? Okay. Here I've
no,
noticed
not
them
on
a
this.
lot around my mulberry bush.
We have a thing called there's a fungus in New Brunswick, and I'm in a kind of a rainforest, so that wouldn't survive here. It would get eaten up pretty quick. But to go back to the pollinators, this property is ruled by ants, and and this is an indicator of how healthy um, this land is. And there are mountains, ant hills all over, and they run the garden, and they pollinate all of my garden very well. But they also eat like there's no bugs in the garden. There's no creepy crawlies on my tomatoes or anything. The ants run everything. In fact, you got to watch yourself. If you brush up against a plant, you could find yourself jumping around because these are
Do they
the
bite?
sort of
Are those the
yeah,
ones?
these are the
Oh,
ones that have the red segment in the middle,
okay.
and they are voracious. So, and even like if I sit down on the grass and I'm gardening, if I sit in the wrong place because they have trails, I know where their trails are, so you got to keep away from them or you're in deep trouble. But
You're an enemy of their territory.
I don't see that. No, I feed them. I give them lots of food. I've increased their food source, and accordingly, there's more ants. And this property is very rich in food for many animals. And one of the ant mounds is about a meter and a half in diameter. So you can kind of think like 5 feet in diameter and almost a foot and a half tall. And it is a brute. And I gotta like I've looked at the age of them and stuff like that. And I asked the expert friend of mine, and this could be over 200 or 300 years old. So but they live in trees and they pollinate all of them. There's mountain ash here. There's Saskatoon berry. There's apples, a whole bunch of different kinds. But so I kind of think of, you know, this season as, everything coming back to life in full bore, ready for the summer. So I notice almost every day two or three things that are going through its early cycle. So obviously a great time to get out and walk around. But I will say I love winter too. I love being outside in winter. Right now it's really wet in the garden and muddy, so I hate that part because when I walk around, my boots are just like covered in, in Bay of Fundy mud. But the birds are going to be coming through, Saul, and
Oh yeah,
there's probably over 20 species of sometimes 20 species of warblers that come through because this is on the major pathway to the Arctic. But
Atlantic
hopefully, we'll
Flyway.
see warblers in a few weeks. Yeah, and I'll leave it at that.
Do you get, sorry, Harold, just had a couple questions for you. Well, one is about the ants. Where they have their mounds, is it an area that stays like relatively dry?
Well, this is kind of a rainforest on a hill, so there is very few areas for them to be dry. Um, and that's maybe why they have more pronounced mounds than other properties. And because in the spring, like even like in the winter, you get this water seeping up from the ground and it actually lifts plants out of the dirt because it's fine silt. There's no rocks in this property. It's all fundy silt. So a lot of my plants that I plant, um, if you don't plant them in the right place, the winter will push it right out of the ground. And it's kind of funny because in the springtime, if there's any dandelions in um, my garden spits them out, and I just go and pick them all up and throw them, like I roast them and use them for tea. But it's interesting, the hydrodynamics of this property are very complex, and understanding where to plant things is critical here because if you put it in the wrong place, it won't grow.
Harold, I have the opposite. I have clay-like soil, which isn't very
Whereabouts are you, Kim? You're in.
south southern Ontario, like
Oh,
uh,
okay. Yes, I've lived
GTA.
there.
Yeah, close to St.
Yes,
Catharines. So
doesn't
you'll get,
everybody live in Southern Ontario?
well, exactly. No, Northern Ontario
I
is
used
Unless
to
you're
live
beautiful.
Neil
in
Young.
Windsor.
Unless you're Neil Young.
Yeah, I used to live in Windsor, and I looked at the growing map, and on my little dot on Windsor, it was only a few blocks, was the same Carolinian zone that's at Point Pelee. So I had amazing tomato. Like my garden was incredible in Windsor.
Well, so I have that type of soil, and I think what you're saying about the ants is so correct because about probably about like 6 years, I moved where I had my little vegetable garden, and it's downward. It's kind of like on a flat part, quite near the house, but then it's downward sloping, and the ants have come and they've parked themselves basically just a little south of my vegetable garden. But it's downward sloping, so you know, I have to plant clover there because the grass gets washed out. But I'm wondering if they're going there, one, because the vegetable garden's there, but two, because they're not getting wet there because all the water is like going downward.
Yeah, nature finds its most optimum place to be. You know.
Right. I remember witnessing a few years ago the neighbor to the right of me. He had ants on his front lawn, and the trouble he went to get rid of those ants. And it just makes me think they're there for your benefit. I mean, sure, it's a mound, you don't like the way it looks, but they're doing so much work for your garden. And yeah, it kind of just, kind of throws me. Uh, but
But
it.
I think, Kim,
Hmm.
depending, like the location of your compost pile can help make them move away from an area you don't want them. So if you give them food elsewhere, they won't come. Like if they're close to the house, you can kind of find their nest and then build like a compost bucket in the ground, and you can actually bait them away from your house. And I've defeated ants in my garden, and I say defeated uh, slugs. Defeated in the means that they don't eat my food, but it's slugs as well. And I've cracked the code on slugs. I think I've told you about that before.
Yeah, I think feel free to share with us again. But I do remember that a while ago. But yeah, you're quite the
Yeah,
gardener.
if your seedlings, okay, because I'm in a rainforest and slugs would eat everything. That's what I found out the first year. I have slugs, which is I moved to a totally new growing
Mhm.
zone, so I wasn't familiar with this property. But I found that goldenrod, okay, which is a indigenous plant and a ground cover. If I take that goldenrod and crack it and bruise it and smush it up so it's all like destroyed, and then you lay that around the perimeter of your garden, the slugs will smell it and eat that first, and they'll fill themselves up on that, and they won't eat your seedlings. So you have to, yep, that, and it works so well. I'm like, man, this because people spend all this money on uh, toxic solutions and copper, and they do all these dumb things that don't work, salt, and like it doesn't work, but that works.
Right. Oh, thank you. I do actually have goldenrod in my garden because it's one of those natural pollinator flowers that they say to get. Yeah, I've heard people talking about they'll put beer out for the slugs to climb into and
Oh,
drown and stuff
beer
like that.
works, but they don't drown, and that's the thing. Is like
They just get
an
drunk.
engineer. No, an engineer actually did a study on this and had a video camera, and 99% of the slugs slug away. But if you want to, and I've used beer because I make wine and beer. If you like, if you have a square garden, if you put that beer um, at each corner, say 10 or 15 feet away from the corner of that garden, the slugs are going to smell that at night and go away from your garden. So they won't go in your garden. So that's something I
Ah,
also use. Yeah.
okay. Oh, well, thank you for that. I was going to ask
So
about skunkweed because I was, well, apparently, um, I had I listed or put up there in the pill a picture of some flowers a few days ago. They're wildflowers from Ontario and also probably most of like northeastern North America. Do you know them, Sal?
No, I don't know them, and
Okay.
I wanted to. Oh, can I just break in for a
Yeah, of
minute because
course, of course.
I don't know how many of you saw my tweet yesterday, and I asked Google, and I forgot the. Of course, I forgot the name, but there's a way to calculate, based on position of the planets, the absolute minimum round trip distance, time to go from Earth to Mars, and then you hang out in Mars for about a year, and then you go back. So it's called a minimum round trip distance. And I asked Google for the minimum round trip distance for a manned flight, and it gave me the minimum one way trip for the Mariner spacecraft. But it said the minimum manned distance were the trips for the Mariner spacecraft, which so AI tried to answer using my question as the answer, and then
Oh no.
it completely screwed up. So I just Googled skunkweed, and the first thing I see
Oh,
is the skunky side of cannabis.
of cannabis?
What? What? Why does AI? Because the thing is, it doesn't seem to appreciate that sometimes you're asking an actual, honest to God question, but it's like, no, this is what everybody else is
That's
asking.
what it was
So
trained.
it was trained.
That
Because
was
to
it was
me,
trained on that.
I mentioned earlier about skunk cabbage. So I was like, okay, so
Right.
this is not the same as skunk cabbage. So I wanted to find out about it because we have. Uh, I I lost my phone, so I have a new phone. I mean, I could find my old photographs, and one of these days I should really search for my old photographs and put them up on the nest because I've been photographing it for years. In fact, about I don't know 7 or 8 years ago, I was walking with my wife, and we found a skunk cabbage that was so beautiful. She used that on her phone wallpaper for like 3 years.
I would love to
Skunk
see a picture
cabbage.
of it.
You should have. It should be native to you.
I I don't
It's
like we do have something called
very.
skunk weed, and if
It's
you
more in British Columbia and then on the East Coast than in Ontario.
It's a very swampy. I mean, it loves the wet,
what color is it?
but every
It stinks. It
It
stinks.
stinks.
It
Well,
stinks too.
we have
it is literally every color. I'll have to get whatever photographs I have to show you, but it's beautiful. It is,
yeah,
and
try to
it's
get a
random, and
photograph.
it's completely. I have some photographs already, so let me see if I can do this. I got to break off of. Uh,
Well,
I
while you're doing that,
I
I just want
will.
to
Yes, yeah. Go ahead.
I'll just
Speak.
mention about the trilliums, which in the three flowers that I sent people, it's the one that has three quite large white petals. Um, it's the provincial flower of Ontario, where I live, and I actually have one in my garden that I successfully um, put there a few years ago, let's just say 10 years ago. And it actually has multiplied, and I think it really loves where it is. The lifespan of some trilliums are remarkable. Their lifespan can rival humans, and I think this is a plant that is like humans in many ways because apparently it doesn't reach sexual maturity until teenage years. Apparently it's ignored by springtime bees and flies, and but they have found that they employ ants to disperse their seeds, and the way they do this is quite extraordinary. Attached to each seed is a small fleshy offering called an elanisum. And what this is it's a structure that's attached to the seed that's rich in fats and proteins. And this entices the ants to carry the seeds back to their colonies, where it's then consumed. This was found out by a woman named Carol Gracie, and she writes about it in her book called Spring Wildflowers of the Northeast. The trillium seeds apparently they end up smelling and they have a scent identical to that of dead ants. Now, what do ants do with these dead ants that are in their colony? Well, they put them beyond the colony. Um, so whatever Harold was talking about, they're taking them and they're dumping them, and this helps the trillium plants multiply and reproduce because there's a rich fertilizer of these moldering ant bodies in this dump rather than in the deep tunnels of the colony. So I thought that was really cool the way there's this scent and how nature and the plant and the animals are working together. Um, that's the white
You you
trillium.
want to you want to hide your dead.
Yeah, that's you got to bury them away from where the colony is. That makes sense. Um, there's also the red trillium, which I have to say I haven't seen. I've only seen the white trilliums. And they also emit a very foul or odor. And the idea behind this type of trillium is that it mimics dead meat or carrion pulpit. And it's very showy. It has a very distinctive look. And people will find this very interesting. It apparently has the ability to switch genders, which adds spice to its personality. And perhaps it demonstrates that diverse sexual expression is not a trait unique to humans. Gender switching is a part of the Jack in the Pulpit survival strategy. When times are good and resources are rich, Jack will be Jill and produce seeds. When times are lean, Jack will bide his time, producing pollen but not fruit. So that's
That
pretty interesting.
there are amphibians and fish that do the same, and also snails and other bivalves that will change gender based on the sex ratio of the population. That if you don't have enough females, males will become female to make sure that there's enough breeding population. So it's like you literally, yeah, it's time to switch.
Right, right. Yeah, but I mean, but it's a plant, right? So we tend to think as
Yeah.
humans that, only animals will have this capability, but plants actually have these abilities as well, which is quite fascinating. The other flower, the yellow one, which is quite beautiful, and the Jack in the Pulpit, I don't really see that much around where I live. The trilliums, absolutely yes, but it comes out probably the second or third week of April. I do remember years ago that it was like around Mother's Day, which is mid-May when they were coming out, but I do believe they're coming out earlier now. But the trout lily is another one that I've seen quite a bit in where I go for walks. And apparently, the shape of the plant's bulb looks like a dog's tooth. Um, they produce spectacular drifts of flowers and abundance. They just cover, the forest floor. Um, how they do it is because they get colonized by a fungus that feeds on the nutrients that are stored in the bulb, and then they end up spreading it. It's the fungus that they benefit from the ability of the fungus to be able to absorb these nutrients and spread the plant. So they say, it spreads quite rapidly and maybe even double of other plants not so afflicted with the fungus. Um,
By the way, I put up two different posts. The most recent photograph that I had, and I went back and I found about 10 other photographs, so I chose the four flashiest ones. So you can see five examples of stock cabbage. They're all the same basic yellow, uh, burgundy, and green, but in different combinations and different speckling patterns. And some of them are really stunningly beautiful, uh, which is why I photographed them.
oh, I do
Um,
remember you posting them last year, actually. Yeah, they are amazing. I have never seen anything like that around here, though. That's incredible.
it's funny, but I before I was a before I was deeply into bird watching, I was into plant photography, and I would go in Maine, Mount Desert Island, Acadia National Park, and I would go through the swamps to photograph wild orchids. And my wife says, "Well, I just switched from at from one source of mosquitoes, orchids, to another source of mosquitoes, birds." because where you find birds, you're going to find mosquitoes.
Right, that's true. That's true. Well, in looking at the signs of spring, it seems doesn't just seem, it actually is. Spring is arriving earlier every year. I think it was the year of 2023 in Washington, D.C., that the cherry blossom trees started to
Oh,
bloom a few weeks earlier than usual. And even where you are, Sal, the big apple leaves were appearing in Central Park a full month earlier. Um, early,
we're
usually.
sprouting.
Are you sprouting
We're
right now?
sprouting right now. Yeah, it's not as early as in the last 2 years, but yeah, we have cherry blossoms are starting right now. I remember my first cherry blossom festival, which would have been sometime around 1990 two or 1993, and that was Washington D.C. and that was May, and now they're having them this time of year. It was like May 5th, May 6th of 2003, 2004.
I mean, this year I don't feel like it's coming earlier because we did have snow and colder temperatures well into March. But and I don't. The only trees I see budding are the maples, which get, I guess, like I almost want to call it like a fruit on it that the squirrels are up in the trees and eating it. But other than that, I don't think that spring is exceptionally earlier this year, which is good because I was looking at the long-term forecast, and next week we're back to below zero at nighttime. So I just get worried that people, we get a couple of nice days and they're immediately outside raking away the leaves, and then the insects don't have any protection against the frost, which is sure to come. So people, please leave the leaves at least for another couple of weeks. Um,
I started my garden uh, because it takes a long time. It's a lot of work and there's lots of hours of work to prepare it for the spring. So I did get rid of my 2024 tomatoes, which have been standing there forever. But yeah, I had to. I left them out there until last week. So yes, I even and obviously there's a difference between leaves and but tomatoes actually and the other thing,
but
I also did
Sal, did you plant?
indoors.
Oh, indoors. Okay, because even now, like they said, that I think the frost-free date. I mean, in Canada, it's considered Victoria Day weekend, but that's definitely moving back. But I think where you are and south of where you are, um, it's now April 20th, and then they say that it's probably moved back about 5 days from that because of spring coming earlier. But that's one of the big problems, right? Is that we're having these unusual early springs, the plants start blooming, but then their leaves are very vulnerable to frost
Yeah.
because there invariably will be another frost coming because that's the long-term norm for the transition between winter and the spring. Um, yeah, I mean, there's a mismatch between the animals and the plants in terms of spring coming earlier. And then there's also a mismatch between different types of plants, between plants and trees. But believe it or not, the biggest shift in terms of the phenological timing of spring is happening in Asia and in Europe. The
Oh,
timing of leaf out, which is what they call like the trees budding, in common overstory trees has shifted 9 to 15 days earlier since the 1980s in North America. Spring leaf out has advanced by about a week. They
sorry, I'm
Oh,
I'm gasping for breath because one of my cats, Gabe, just mounted me. He just completely launched himself on top of me. He's a big little boy. He just took all the air out of me. Hello, Gabe. Uh,
Oh,
I was going
John
to
John.
say that, yeah, I'll make very, very brief. Um, 3 or 4 years ago, uh, we always would hunt for tomatoes, the varietals that we wanted. So we would go from gardening center to gardening center. And everybody said, we don't even sell tomatoes before May 1st. And now May 1st is considered too late to plant if you want to be optimal. So, okay, yeah, John, good afternoon. I have
Good
to check on that.
afternoon. um, just wanted to like throw in a little joke. Uh, it's around this time we always bring up this Canada seasonal meme. It's called 11 Seasons of Canada. So it goes winter, and then after that we have cool spring, and then we have second winter, and then now would be called spring of deception, and then we have third winter. So in my experience, that winter goes till April, like third week of April usually. And I remember this because like there's been like roof collapses from snowstorms in April. So then after third winter, it's mud season, and after mud season, it's actual spring, like 2 weeks, and then summer, and then we got
About two
false
days.
fall. We got false fall, and we got second summer, also 2 weeks, and then we got fall, and we go back to winter. So these are sort of like I feel like the kind of like spring and winter, it's kind of like a bit of a tango. It kind of like it reveals itself, and then winter's like, no, I'm not done yet. And then I kind of feel like in my experience, winter lets you know when it's leaving. Like it's always like a final angry snowstorm. So I never trust this right now as like spring moving forward, but I'm interested because maybe it's part of the climate shift. If there's no more winter after, that would be an odd thing for it to for where I live for it to not go into April at least third week. And I've seen it snow very very lightly in May, where the snow is so light it kind of floats in the air. It almost like falls and then it like gets blown upwards. So I've seen from my balcony snow rising, like going up. It's like the coolest thing. But it's like that's usually like the first week of May. So I'm not convinced right now. But I'm enjoying the weather. Like I go out like it's spring, but it's not over, I don't think, for Canada at least.
A couple of footnotes. One, the two places in the world that are warming up the fastest, continent level. I'm not talking about band, I'm not talking about the region. Continent level, the two places that are warming up the fastest are Asia and Europe. And they're warming at about, and land only, and they're warming both at about the unbelievable sum of 7/10 of a degree per decade. And I'm not talking about the last decade, I'm talking about the last 50 years. So it is absolutely mind boggling the changes that we've seen in Asia and Europe. So, in terms of plants not knowing what the hell to do, oh, yeah, they uh, things are just going at an incredible levels. And we're seeing not quite that rate here in the United States and Canada. But yes, I'm 63, I'm 62, and change, significant change, and and I remember what it was like when I was 6 or 7, and winter didn't end until May, and you had snowstorms in the second week of April that sometimes were up to my head. I was a kid, but still, yes, this was what winter used to be like for us. And now, uh, we've already declared it over. No, we already know that we're not going to go significantly below freezing anymore. It's not going to have any serious threat of snow. Even if it snows, it's not going to stick. And this is, to me, okay, 50 years of looking at climate is for a person a long time, but for a geological event, it's a nothing. It's a blink in the eye, and we've all experienced this in our lifetimes. How are we going to? How do you explain this to kids that what you see now is not what we saw when we were your age?
That's a good point. I mean, I still don't plant anything until after May 24 weekend. That's because as these, um, with the threat of the earlier spring is that frost may come and may destroy everything, right? And they actually say that this is a big problem in the southeastern United States where they have like the peaches and the oranges and everything like that. That spring is coming earlier, so the trees start budding, and then while they flower, a big frost comes. I think that happened in Georgia a few years ago, right? Peach trees, they lost like basically like 70% of their peach crop that year. Um, Flower specimens that have been collected over 120 years. And the great thing is a lot of this phenological data or herbaria, which is like dried plants and leaves and everything like that. Which the Kew Gardens Museum in England, I think, has the best collection in terms of the longest collection of this type of species. Um, Anyways, most of these collections have been digitalized, so it's a lot easier to study. They looked, as I was saying, at specimens over a 120-year period, and they wanted to see about these phenological mismatches between overstory plants, which are like different species of trees, and understory, like the wildflowers that we've been talking about. And they found that there was a mismatch in terms of how they're responding to climate change. And but they did find differences between Asia and in Europe. Um, they here in North America, what they're finding is that it's the overstory that both the overstory and the understory are responding to the warmer temperatures, but the overstory is responding more, which means they're budding or leafing out about, I think they said, 5 days earlier every year. Wildflowers because um,
They need to be timed
about
properly for the pollinators.
yes. Yeah, exactly. But they need that time. Like, I think 50% of the 14 species that they looked at get 50% of their carbon activity or their photosynthesis prior to the overstory or the tree's leaf out. So if the overstory leaves out earlier and the wildflowers don't match this, there's a mismatch. And what they're finding is that these wildflowers, because of the earlier spring temperatures in North America, are getting 5 days less on average of, undisturbed photosynthesis, basically, undisturbed sunlight. And they get 50% of their energy needs for the whole year during this time. And some of them are even higher. Like the trillium I was talking about, I think is like 66%. They get 66% of their energy needs before the trees are leafing out. So there's that. And then with Asia, what they found was that the wildflowers were more in sync with what was happening with the overstory, because it seems like the overstory trees are not responding to temperature as rapidly and as sensitively as the North American temperate forests are. Hi, Harold.
Oh, hello. Yeah, what you're
Hello.
discussing, I kind of dependent on temperature also, not just light. Um, so you have like insects that will emerge at specific temperatures independent of photo response. Sort of more scientific understanding of the balance of nature and these second order differentials of change, and just how like the term extreme weather, like our weather's far more variable, and you know, behind us showing a little water. But it's interesting, Saul, like we moved here 7 years ago, and our forest, or sorry, it's not my forest, the forest
Mhm.
is um has completely changed. And you know, back in the late spruce, which is an endangered species now under threat, we're in a rainforest along the Bay of Fundy, so it's very wet, so it'll happen slower. Complete shade under this canopy of densely ancient, like this is old growth spruce. Like there's dead stands of spruce that are probably 30 or 40 years old, and these are like about, you know, anywhere from 100 to 100 feet tall, like 2 or 3 feet diameter. Damage that they can do to the spruce, because usually they're protected by the cold. So in cold areas around here, you can see that the spruce are thriving, but those that are out in the with oak, with um, mountain ash, and um, a few other shrubs, they're more hardwood, but there's certain areas where it's completely open now, and that has all been replaced with sleep during the winter, and they've left because they don't have the cover from the snow. So I don't know where they are now, but they don't sleep here anymore. by the Royal Navy. They came in and stole all the wood for the warships there, and they burned, slashed, and burned everything and got rid of a lot of the biodiversity of the indigenous plants and flowers. So I'm replanting a lot of those lost species. In Moncton has a seed bank of these seeds, and they're free. You can go there and get them for free. But what they ask is a different discussion. It's totally it's totally evolved past what it started out as. So that's what I'm going to be doing this year is re-establishing
Categories to the north, to the south. Such an extraordinarily dramatic change that your two categories of bios
it. It exposes the ocean floor twice a day at 4 degrees Celsius. So that moderates in the winter, it makes it a little bit warmer. And in the summer, it's like a natural. And then a few minutes later, so the
uh
weather here is highly moderated. And it's interesting if you get the right breeze in the wintertime, it could be like a -10 or a -15 with the wind in the right direction. It'll actually up it'll actually warm up a few degrees. Like we're right beside the water, so it's very.
may not understand. What is the difference between your low tide and high tide? And I advise everyone to please take a seat.
It, um, there's king tides, and those are all influenced. The Like at the beach I'm located closest to, the tide will go out like 2.5 kilometers, so it exposes this giant surface area of warm of the shorebirds. So twice a day they get a giant area to feed on, and then it's all the tide goes up, and then they all wait along the shore. Kind of they rely on that, and we're talking about temperature, and this is one of the things. As soon as you start messing around with these cycles, it disrupts migratory patterns are about 10,000 years old because they keep going farther and farther up north. And actually, some species aren't even coming down this far anymore. And yeah, so I mean, nature adapts, but
You get the Atlantic puffins there.
oh, your microphone is a bit muffled. Could you repeat
Oh,
that?
is it? Oh. Okay, can you hear me now? Atlantic puffins there.
There is one island. It's actually shared between the United States and America. To predators, but also because of the height of the tides. It's not really like they're more towards the bottom of the Bay of Fundy where the change in tide is like one
Closer to Maine.
third of place to make a home up here.
Right, and they feed off of fish, right? So it would be maybe hard for them to get the fish with the tides coming in and out as
Yeah, you also
as they do there.
right, and you have to remember that the water here is like
Yeah, I think for people in the audience who aren't that familiar, they got the idea for how to can sardines by watching puffins. They might have 7 or 8 sardines in their bills at the same time. They're extraordinary birds. I was going to mention, actually ask, I should say.
5 minutes. There's 2 UNESCO World Heritage sites, and the one at Mary's Point was the first in the world, and it is a recognized sensitive area. Doing is I'm taking pictures of everything that sea level rise will destroy, and it won't ever be back, and it won't ever. You can't replace, you know, that food source, and it's. I think it's one way to communicate, like what's going to be happening everywhere because of the amp. But here it's amplified 6 to 7 times. But that's even amplified more with a king tide and with weather. So we may see, amplified. So where I am in the world is going to be the first place to be erased. So I'm taking pictures of landmarks that will be gone, won't be returned.
I'm not sure you're going to be the first. I think Miami will beat you.
No, I'm
Miami is.
yeah, no, I'm talking about um, like the amount of, but a lot of areas here are silt, so it's going to chew up a lot more because it's like mud. It's just going to get eaten and washed away. And what's going to happen is in between. If you look at the map of Canada, it's going to literally separate there, and it's going to separate Nova Scotia from New Brunswick because it's silt, and and then in turn, what that is going to do is it's going to connect the Gulf of St. Lawrence with the Bay of Fundy. High tides will be gone because it will get flooded from the other side. So that's what I mean by the most dramatic change. There will be because these are two very distinct
Miami.
that site
It's
because
a
it will
small
flood.
world. Is it the tunnel that they have it's a small world after all? Is
No,
that
they have tunnels connecting.
Yes. Can I tell you guys a quick story about that ride?
Yes.
I, I'm with my wife. Actually, this is before we were married, but I'm with my wife, and we're in Disney World. On the line, and a group of 6 people join us, and it is Steven Tyler, his daughter Liv, his granddaughter, and 3 bodyguards back because I recognized him, and I wasn't going to make a whole big scene of it. This was before Liv was famous, so I just, hello, how you doing? About 30 seconds later, that week had the world's cheerleading competition. So I'm next to Steven Tyler, and 100 cheerleaders walk up to him. Identified him. So the
I can
guys
hear
are
it
like
now. I can hear it
getting
now.
ready that the girls were at least, yeah, and he knew how to handle it. And so you're okay. You
I'm
got in
okay.
and out. You see, you sound okay now.
That's
Yeah.
weird. I don't know why, but I'll just make this short. Apparently, and I've been to the Bay of Fundy. I've been on the New Brunswick side and the Nova Scotia side, and I've probably driven right where Harold's talking about, in between see them before there was a collapse, and if people don't know about it, there's these iconic rocks in New Brunswick called the Hopewell Rocks, and some of them. Harold, do you think that's due to the rising tides and
Yeah,
climate change?
they're always getting erased. I'm actually 20 minutes from Hopewell Rocks, way in between where I am, like Hopewell Rocks and St. John. So it's about
Okay.
2 hours, a lot closer to St.
Oh,
John.
right.
But
Okay.
I'm 20 minutes from Hopewell Rocks, and yeah, conglomerate, and it's always getting worn down. But that's a natural process. Um, and I've been trying to learn more about the indigenous and they're very like they're I'm still trying to grasp the stories and comprehension and what they mean now. But it is amazing. But they're all going to be knocked over in time down. It was quite the news, and we that happened before we moved here. Um, but we had been here, like we vacationed here many years before. Family of peregrine falcons there that we go and photograph in the spring. Um, and they just have a
Unfortunately, I just gotten the bad news again that my favorite hiking trail in New York is still down. Not quite 2 years ago. 21 months ago, we lost the 1776 and 1777 trail and redirected. At least that part of the trail has been returned. If anyone knows anything about North American trails, the AT is
all the way around all around the Micmac territories.
so you hook up at Katahdin at the northern face of Katahdin.
The putting of making a gravel path and all that business. So it's just a narrow trail that can be hiked, and most parts are accessible and quite dangerous, by the way.
really upset because this is going to be the second year in a row that I've lost this extraordinary resource to flooding. I will. I mean, this was to me a 5 or 6 time a year trip, and I didn't just go in spring migration. I went in fall migration, and I went in summer. I frequently would do that as a birthday trip. And on a trail that is one of the most famous trails in in America, and it's been destroyed.
Low-lying, I guess, coastal areas, which is exactly what the climate scientists said was going to happen with sea level rise, right? It'll happen in the northeastern
Where
United States.
lowlands, wetlands, because they make money, and because they make so much money,
Tourism.
New Jersey keeps on rebuilding, and Long Island keeps on rebuilding. But upstate New York's trails don't. Not too far away from the Statue of Liberty, all the way to Albany, the long path. I've done sections of the long path. It is an absolutely beautiful trail, and part of the long path is down because, uh, and part of the AT was down, and these trails. A lot of these really stunning. Yes,
Are you taking pictures in this? Are you taking photographs, or are you just bird watching?
I I bird. I used to photograph, but I found that it was just uh, it
Sure, what is being lost, because the extreme weather kind of is attacking from both directions in these sensitive areas, because on one hand you have sea level rise, which we experience here, but it also sort of little freshwater streams, and they all come together as a river, and then it switches over to a briny, and it's these sensitive areas that are going to get erased first. So I think taking pictures or making you know what I mean, like capturing that
I
story.
the parks in New York. So, oh my God, you go to YouTube and there are hundreds of videos on the trail. So at least, you know, I, I this is 50 miles north of the mouth of the Hudson River. And at that time, the Hudson River is a lot shorter. It's hard to, I mean, you're telling everyone. It is hard for people to appreciate the extraordinary wealth of estuary environment that we have. I mean, the natives were here first,
Absolutely.
but this is an extraordinary place, and this is an extraordinary place for I wanted to mention this 2 hours ago, but this black earth like you've never seen before in your life.
Oh, the
The
Canadian
soil,
Shield?
the soil is is Vanta black. It's that black, and obviously it is this time of year you have all of those nutrients are flowing down the mountain streams. Every time you have a, I was going to say a snow, going to take all of the biomass that is has accumulated next to the stream and will then bring it downstream where it will go to and replenish the soil and replenish the estuaries. This is why, again, this part of the world, when European settlers saw this, they were in a state of shock. It's extraordinary.
Well, I like what Harold's alluding to, which is like a citizen science, or bearing witness to, I guess, our using our observations by people like Thoreau and many other ecologists, that they just took out a journal and wrote down when they saw a certain plant Richard Primack, um, from Boston University. He used Thoreau's journals and his plant observations, plus other data. I think someone by the name of Hosner. Um, and so this is going back to like 1850. are coming out 5 days earlier. So they're losing 7 days of light. Um, so, you know, I mean, I know there's also someone I was we need yeah, I mean, I would love to do something like that here. I wish I would have started years ago and thinking about it, you know, every year just writing when is the oak tree blooming? When is 'Oh, let me read this part first because this is interesting. This idea of the citizen science is really aided by social media and by our phone. 2010 to more than 14.7 million in 2019. There's also an online resource for classifying plants and I think
There's a few others ones, but
since 2010 it has had almost it probably more now because this paper is a little out of date. 14 million insects posts. There is power in our phones and documenting things and uploading them and because scientists actually use this data. Um, what if
and here in the United States and Canada, we
is
I'm
that the
also
one
not on
out of
Facebook.
Cornell? Is that the one that's from Cornell? Because I
Yes, that's
really
the
like.
one.
I, I,
Okay.
I,
That's that's the one I
if,
use, and actually, I'm really active in this area, so they're really looking at my bird do the same thing.
Oh, okay. I'll look out for you.
Yeah,
Thanks.
uh,
but
a guy I
it
heard
is
with
they use this
a
to
guy I
drive their
sorry,
simulations, right?
discussion outside of the two migrations, but he's one of the biggest local eBird guys, and he's always sending out information, and he has problems. And people say, "I've got photographic evidence here." Says, "Oh no, you got it wrong," and we're all looking at the photograph and we're like, "Oh yeah, that's a Swainson," and he said, "No, it's not a Swainson." We're like, dude, everybody's seeing it. You know, we've got 50 people looking. It won't be a Thursday.
That's okay.
And it will be earlier in the day. It'll
Like
probably
6
be a
a.m.
Wednesday.
Who's in?
No,
Who's
I wouldn't do 6 a.m. I wouldn't do 6 a.m. And it would
I'm
probably be
in.
a Wednesday. And the reason why it'd be a Wednesday, so if I go there on a Wednesday, and maybe the reason why I'm more broad spectrum than other people is because I went there and I saw the astrophysics and I saw the physics and I saw the biology and the ornithology, and it all stuck in my brain.
I mean,
Because
absolutely. Like what we get exposed to, what the type of institutions that we're able to go to. Like here in Canada, I mean, I lived in Toronto most of my life. I went to the Royal Ontario Museum. Probably, not as elaborate as the one that you have, the Natural History Museum in New York City, but definitely had an influence. They also at one time. Never mind. They had oh my goodness, I can't remember the name of it. A planetarium. That's what they had right next to the Royal Ontario Museum. It's been so long, but as a child, it was open, and the building is still there, but it hasn't been open for years. And I just remember going there and thinking, "Wow, that was one of the best things I've ever seen in my life." So we have to support, every type of ecological, nature-based education institution as we can, because if people aren't exposed to those things, they won't get a chance to
and
develop a love for it.
and the
But
horrible fact is that they're becoming a lower priority for the government. And what shocks me about this is when you think about the economic value in my life that I have created because I went into the sciences, the amount of money that my work and effort brought to the United States economy. And a lot of that came from the free education that I received in the American Museum of Natural History. Okay, it might not have been free, but it was a hell of a lot cheaper than what I did. The schools I went to and the universities I went to. So when you think about how, you know, museums and these other places of higher education that are accessible to the public, their secondary values, the knockoff effects of this are well in advance of the actual costs. There's an expression for this in international affairs. It's soft power, and the soft power of these cultural institutions carries a spectacular economic secondary effect.
absolutely, absolutely. I've just John's gone, but I just wanted to list a few things that they found through these studies about what's happening with our earlier springs. And this is from a book by T. Crimmins, and she unfortunately I don't have the title of it. I could get it though, but it is a book about phenology and early spring. She says that tulip tress flowers. are budding 27 days earlier than the 1800s. Common
Jesus.
milkweed, which we know is the plant critical for endangered monarch butterflies, now flowers 13 days earlier. And I know that there are different species of milkweed, and I that's one thing I want to research is the different types and the different dates for their flowering, and which ones I could plant here to make sure that there is some milkweed here that for when the monarchs do arrive that they'll have that here, because that's a huge problem, especially with the declines that we've seen in recent years. Overleaf plants leaf out 19 days sooner than the early 1800s. Let me see. In Switzerland, cherry trees are full 30 days earlier than they leafed out or budded out 130 years ago. But you know what? Actually, this is something that they're finding out more about, or want to do more research. They say in the southern hemisphere, 70% of the plants and trees show no evidence of changes. So it seems to be mainly happening in the northern hemisphere.
By the way, I wanted to ask you. I'm trying frankly to Google this, and I'm not seeing it, unfortunately. Are you in the range of the blue flag iris?
Like, yes, I believe I am. Yes.
Have you ever seen a full-blown stand of wild blue flag irises? And I'm not talking about in somebody's backyard. I mean in the wild.
I haven't. How
Oh
about
my
you,
God.
Harold? Have you seen them, Sal?
We're going to be going back to Mount Desert Island in 8 weeks. I'm going to miss one Thursday. We're going to be going back to Mount Desert Island and Cadillac Mountain, and I'm hoping that I'm not too late in the year for a blue flag monocolony. The two times that I've seen them in my life were in glacial cirques on Cadillac Mountain, which is the highest mountain on the east coast of North America. It's 1,830 feet high at its peak. That's what, like a little less than 600 meters high. It's not a very, very high mountain, but there are a couple of areas on the mountain where you might have about a 1 hectare glacial cirque. A glacial cirque is essentially the glacier came in uh, 22,000 years ago and came out 10,000 years ago, and it carved out a circle and left behind topsoil. So you maybe have, so you may be on a mountain, but all of a sudden you have this little tiny bowl of, like I said, a hectare in size. And it's just covered in irises as far as the eye can see, which isn't that far. It's only like 100 meters in diameter. But it is one of the most spectacular things that you will ever see in the wild, where you might see, hundreds of thousands of these about not quite a meter tall flower, meter tall stalk, and the flower is about the size of your fist. I'm seeing that they're native to a lot of North America. So these are far from being, I can't find the exact range though. I don't know why it's not giving me exact range. Let me try
I found it in
images.
Canada. In Canada, it's all the way from Manitoba to Nova Scotia. But I actually have never seen them in the wild, I don't think.
Hey, Saul,
Uh,
I've
yes.
I've got yeah, they're here, and ours are going to be out in a couple weeks, I figure. Um, but they go as far as in Newfoundland, in some areas that aren't wind scrubbed to death by the Arctic winds. If there's like a little sheltery area, um, you'll have all these wildflowers, but in miniature, and they're about some of them, like the orchids are micro orchids, and they get really small. And you know the lady slippers? They're
Yes.
like one. I'd say not 1/20th, I'd say 1/15th the size of a plant in like you'd find around in our area. And there's parks in on the upper end of Newfoundland that are ecological protected ecological reserves, and it looks like you're walking through a gravel parking lot because it all gets heaved in the winter into these, and it forms a pattern of an emergent pattern of hexagons. And the inside there's a little depression, and then each side inside of all these little areas where the wind won't kill it are these micro orchids that are like 2 or 3 millimeters across. They're called tundra orchids. And there's also the irises, and those irises are miniaturized.
Oh,
And the smallest ones I saw were about 1/10 the size of the adult plant. So inside each of these little gravel depressions is like this little, you have to look for them, and you're not allowed to step. You have to watch it. You feel like a giant, like walking through. Like if you step in the wrong place, you're stepping on like a plant that's been there for 50, 60 years in this little depression. So it's like you got to tread lightly, literally. So I was taking pictures up there with my macro lens, but you'd stop along the side of the road and you'd see like these tiny, tiny irises and tiny, tiny lady slippers, and also the red orchids. But also in Newfoundland, they have these carnivorous pitcher plants, and they're
yes.
and
Oh,
they're
cool.
yeah. So it's very swampy, that kind of swampy stuff. But we're gonna have our irises out, and there's a patch across the street from me that is, and this is an ancient patch. It hasn't been disturbed. I would say it's probably 50 feet wide by about 30 feet deep. So it's a little happy iris colony, and I love to go down there and take pictures and when they're
Yes.
out.
Please
Yeah,
Have
take
you
some
ever have
pictures
you ever
and
been to
share them with
Acadia
us.
National? Have you ever been to Acadia National Park?
I wanted to, but I'm probably, if I went into the United States right now, I'd probably be detained and imprisoned. That's the
Uh,
sad reality with what I've
the
said and
fact
what
that
I
well,
know.
here's the thing. Um, in the United States, it's spectacular because it's unique in terms of its, but it's not that far different than what you have on in Nova Scotia and New Brunswick. The
I,
biggest
I've
difference, of
seen
course, is
Yeah, I've seen pictures, and I'm drooling over Acadia National Park. Like some of those look like, I would love to go there, and it's not that far of a drive for me, but I can't go. I would not be welcome in America right now.
the one thing that makes Acadia unique for the landscape of the Maritimes and well, Acadia is French Canada and French United States. So this is it's an ancient part geologically, but what makes it special is it's tall. These are the highest mountains on the east coast of North America. And so you do have, it is extremely similar geologically to what you have, but it's tall. So you have a lot of extraordinary things because of that. And we do have to wrap up. It's 1:30. The one thing that is extraordinary about mountains, especially mountains, one of these days we have to do this, as mountains near coastlines. We kind of did this with Brazil a couple of weeks ago, but we only did a tiny bit about it. Is you have a completely different biology. If you're near the coastline and if you have mountains nearby, you literally can take a 1 day hike and you can see 10 different climates in 1 day, in 1 hour practically. Well, you'd have to be a really, really fit hiker to do that. But you can see so many different terrains and so many different climates. You can go uh, from a uh, rainforest to above the tree line in, if you're a good hiker, 2 hours.
Hey Saul, I'm looking like right now I'm looking at the across and we have a mountain range that runs from the top of the from Acadia, the same geology, it runs all the way up to Unamaki, which is the Micmac name um for what we call Cape Breton, all the way up in that plateau of I'm near Caledon Mountain, and that is where the Hopewell Rocks is, Caledon Mountain. But you're right, like in between, there's all these little micro uh, ecosystems, and we have a UNESCO. It's called Crooked Creek Outlook, and it's one of these areas that when you go right down to the bottom, you can actually feel like a difference in temperature of like 20, like almost 20 degrees, 25 degrees. Like you go down there in the summer and you're like shaking. It's like cold and it's just like a totally different. And then you walk, like it's just 5 minutes here, it's fog, complete dense fog. Walk another 5 minutes, it's pure sunshine. Walk another 5 minutes, it's raining. It's crazy. And it's all the plant groups are, you can see like the transitions.
That's what I love about Las Vegas. You do Las Vegas, it's 95 degrees. Then you take a 1 hour drive to Mount Charleston, and it's 29 degrees. So you're in Vegas in shorts, and then you drive up to Mount Charleston and you put on your winter weather gear because you're going to be throwing snowballs. So you get in such a small, and of course, again, what this creates so many microclimes, and you get to see so many different types of plant and animal and bird life in such a short, brief stretch of time, and especially in a desert environment, because obviously here on the East Coast we have a lot of rain and a lot of waters, but in a desert environment where it concentrates what little life there is in what few streams and open water that's available. So it is absolutely extraordinary. Does anybody have any questions? Anybody have any comments? We're wrapping up here. Are we done then?
I guess we're done. Thanks,
This was an
everyone.
this was an absolute blast. Hope you guys all enjoyed it. I think next week we're looking to celebrate Earth Day. So
Yes.
assuming Earth is still here next week, that will be our topic. We're going to celebrate Earth Day, and we're going to do more in depth on gardening. We're going to go back to more on birding. Spring is in the air, so this is the time of year when we start to talk about. Most of us are northern hemisphere. Most of us are temperate northern hemisphere, where we all shed our winter clothes and we dip our toes out into the great wild. So hope you all can return next week to see us, to hear us. You can see us in your mind. Yeah, you can visualize us as we speak. Thank you all for coming. Thank you, Kim, for being co-host. Uh, oh, son of a bitch. I'm looking at my screen. It has you as the host, and I'm the co-host. That's because I was dropped out for like 90 seconds. It's cool with me. I don't care.
I don't have that on my screen.
I have that on my phone
Take
screen.
care.
It's calling you the host. All right, next week. Bye bye.